what is the stack that you see people using with n8n?
Actually quite diverse. I think it's actually probably does make sense because the nice thing about that system like n8n is you can literally connect everything to anything. It means like there is probably not kind of this default stack people are using. Like they use literally any LLM, they use any kind of memory or vector store or any kind of applications. And exactly, that's the thing that makes anything great because I don't know what LLM is going to win the race. In the end, who's going to be the best one? If it's going to be one, if it's going to be a million different ones, if it's going to be a small one, a big one, I have no idea. But that's the great thing about n8n is like we don't have to care because the nice thing is you can use whatever is best for your use case. And I think that is what makes it so powerful.
Today, we're joined by Jan Oberhauser, founder and CEO of n8n, who is one of the most remarkable growth stories in the automation era, quadrupling revenue in 8 months after 6 years of steady building. What makes this breakthrough particularly compelling isn't just the explosive numbers, but the strategic pivot that made it possible, transforming from a workflow automation tool into an orchestration layer for AI-powered applications. Jan discusses the counterintuitive marketing strategy that abandoned lead generation to focus on community adoption, the delicate balance between serving free users and enterprise customers, and why he believes horizontal platforms will ultimately win over vertical AI applications. He also shared how their open source ethos informs how they prioritize what to build and how to package it, and the importance of fair code usage in commercializing their technology. Jan's vision for n8n is to become the Excel of AI, the default tool people think of when building anything AI-related. He reveals why empowering builders at the bottom of the market may be the key to capturing enterprise customers at the top, and why the future belongs to those who can connect everything to anything in an increasingly fragmented AI ecosystem. Enjoy the show. So Jan, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We've been in business together for a long time, I think as far back as 2020, so the early days of n8n. So we're grateful for you, being with us and sharing some of the perspectives. I thought maybe a good question to kick off with is just to share a little bit about the last 8 months of really n8n's history. It's been an incredible run. You added, I think, 4 times the revenue in the last 8 months that it took the first 5 or 6 years to really achieve in the company. So the business is really ripping. What happened? What changed?
First, thanks for welcoming me here. Great to be here. To answer your question, what happened? I think it comes down to things that we actually did quite a few years ago, actually almost 2 by now. And I think there's been 2 things. One was obviously our focus on AI. It's like when this whole AI wave started, we kind of, honestly, we were worried a little bit at the beginning, and we were not sure what does it really mean for us. And we knew it's probably going to mean one of 2 things. Either it's going to be a huge opportunity or actually the demise of the company. You obviously want to be very sure it's going to be one and not the other. Then we kind of looked in the market. It's like, what are other companies doing? And what the most companies did is they kind of added nice AI features to the application. And we kind of realized that it's probably not the kind of thing that makes sure we're going to stay around long term. What is really important is to kind of become actually part of the value chain. So what we did is exactly that. It's kind of we not just added AI features, we actually allowed people to build AI-powered applications with n8n. There's obviously nothing that the user base or people kind of realize overnight, like what n8n has become back then. And it obviously takes some time to kind of catch on. And that's where also the second piece comes in. Historically, we kind of focused on mainly 2 things internally at n8n, especially kind of in the marketing department. They always had like this dual focus on obviously kind of creating leads, but also kind of making sure like the inbound that kind of we get more adoption. This kind of always caused a problem in the sense of we were always very good at adoption, but at the same time, leads normally fall short. So what happened is that the marketing department then put everything from adoption in leads just to make sure that we kind of make that goal as well. And then it was obviously problematic because like all the long-term planning actually went away. Like they couldn't really have the impact they could have had. And we realized, hey, we have this amazing community. We have this amazing bottom-up adoption. So instead of actually kind of forcing something that's not really true to us, we just really focus on what was already working. This is really focusing on this kind of top of the funnel. That's what we did. We kind of removed the the lead goal. We actually exchanged it with like an adoption of large organizations. Just went all in the community, making sure like as many people as possible are using n8n. And it kind of also is another thing that you can decide and you make the change, but it's nothing is kind of happens overnight. You actually have to find, you have a lot of trust in that, and you have to kind of really double down and kind of wait, because these things kind of take some time to mature. And that's actually the thing that actually happened. Like it matured, we kind of really doubled down, we kind of empowered our community more, we created more events, we created more content. And that is then in the end, this thing that materialized, especially in the beginning and the end of last year in December, is where the market finally realized that we have become this AI tool, but also kind of the community, especially around on YouTube, where more people created more and more content. Obviously, more content people create, the more other people want to create content, the better it gets ranked, and then everything kind of started to explode.
I had an amazing story at our board meeting a couple of weeks ago, Jan, that you have Jan focus time on long flights, and you actually coded the first version of that AI Nodes product flying back from San Francisco. Is that true?
No, actually, I created quite a few things on planes in the past. That thing I didn't create on planes or trains. I think I always loved the time. Honestly, right now, I always loved that, to be honest. But now I also feel like destroying more than actually helpful. So I kind of create more like MVPs or something like that, or play around rather than actually adding production code on planes or trains anymore, which is sad.
On dodgy Wi-Fi. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Maybe, Jan, if you can take us back to 2019, I think it was just you, sort of founder entrepreneur, when you went out and raised your pre-seed round. What was kind of the aspects, the origin story that really stands out to you? What has really stayed the same from day one of n8n? What has really changed over that time frame?
I think what always stayed true is for sure the kind of focus on the community. Like actually the first people, like in the first week in April, a few people started. And one of the first people that started was at FRL, because I always knew like if we want to make sure that n8n becomes meaningful and kind of becomes the company like I wanted to build, I really have to kind of make sure kind of I invest in the community very early on. I think that it kind of always stayed true. I think another thing is probably something around values. We always, especially I always have to try to be as honest and upfront about things as possible. You also see that, for example, in our license. You probably have seen like, we never call ourselves open source because we don't have an OC approved open source license. So what does it mean? It means our source code is available. Everybody can use it totally for free. They cannot even use it in production. No matter if it's somebody home privately or somebody in a large organization, everybody can use it. What is, however, different in our license is that people cannot commercialize our code. It means nobody can just take our code and offer like a now hosted version of n8n, for example, or kind of create XYZ automator in the product. Why is it important? Because I saw a lot of organizations in the past, like open source organizations, kind of changing license, and people obviously got very angry and they really hated that. And what I thought was quite interesting is people didn't hate it because of the license that the companies chose. People were mainly angry because people like this company changed the rules, and that's never nice. And so what I thought, hey, I think it's a very reasonable thing. So I'm just very honest and upfront about it from the very beginning. I said, hey, I'm not building n8n and giving it away for free because I'm a good person. Like I actually want to build a business around it. I want to make sure I can get paid. I want to make sure all the other people can get paid as well, because I actually think it's in the interest of everybody. So that is why I chose the license. I think that's we always had stayed very true around that. Again, now getting to the second part of the question is like, what changed? I think it's definitely like around like what we started at is like I said, as mentioned before, like we started as this kind of automation tool. Honestly, I never have thought that we would do AI ever. It's like it's never even crossed my mind that we would go into the AI space. But I think in the end, it's like sometimes you see opportunities out there and you just have to take them. And else, I think it makes a difference between building a big sustainable company that really matters, or probably building a kind of a startup at some point just this goes out of business, sadly.
Jan, you've done a masterful job on the community building aspect of n8n. And you mentioned the values, which I'm sure were really critical to earning the trust of your community. Can you also talk a bit about the tactics? It's kind of the constant push and pull of trying to kind of shape or curate the community while also really trying to listen and, and see where they want to go. How tactically, how have you managed the community over the years?
think for the very beginning, it was very important for me just to kind of include people. For example, in the beginning, we didn't have any not telemetry data at all. We didn't collect any telemetry, which was obviously fine in the very beginning, but obviously as a company grows, you kind of literally need data to kind of improve the product very fast. Again, this kind of makes a difference between a company that survives or one that doesn't. So we had to add telemetry data. Another thing we had to add was, at some point, we obviously added paid features. And every time we made a bigger change, we kind of posted it to the community forum first. We shared it with them what we wanted to do, gave them the reason why we wanted to do it, and then kind of listen to their feedback. I think that is just kind of taking them with you when you're doing something. I think that's a very important thing. And another thing is definitely kind of trying to kind of empower them. Actually, like one of the earliest n8n employees was Ricardo. And Ricardo, he's this amazing guy working in Florida, and he was one of the first contributors to n8n. He discovered a product on Product Hunt, and he started to kind of create one node. Then he created 2 nodes, created 3 nodes, and every time he contributed something, I said, "Hey, that's great, thank you very much." And then I kind of gave feedback, I improved things, and he learned, and he was excited and created more nodes. I think at some point he created like 50 or 60 nodes, like integrations for n8n. Then obviously, as soon as I had the first Monday bank, I hired him. But I think it's really just very important to kind of show people that you care and take them with you, and kind of show how much you value them. I really hope the community really knows how much we value them. We try to give back a lot. I think that's generally, this kind of, even though we're not open source, we have this open source ethos where you kind of really give a lot first. And I think you normally get so much more back than you actually receive. We see the same thing again also with our community today, where we just say, like, we empower you, and then they create all of this amazing content, no matter if it's on YouTube, on LinkedIn, they create tutorials. And I think that worked out very well. And it's something they're still doing to this day.
Jan, has there ever been a shift in, given the scale of the community today, right? It's hundreds of thousands of members in size. Has there been a change in how you try and surface the right information or the right ideas, and how you choose which to prioritize coming from that community base?
Yeah, and the beginning was definitely easier. Like, literally in the beginning, like I didn't really worry about monetization at all. So I just wanted to make sure I built the best product, and I just built things that people really wanted. So I could literally, from the very beginning, we had a community forum where people could add feature requests, and people could upvote the ones they wanted to have the most. And that is literally kind of how we chose very early on what to build. Unless this was something totally out of whack, we normally build it because we knew people really valued it very much. And that worked actually for quite a while. At some point, you have to be a little bit more opinionated, but you're not just kind of building what the community wants, but you actually have to kind of think about where the market is going, also how you kind of build something, again, that's sustainable, that, again, especially also something what honestly is also kind of larger organizations use as well, and also just generally where you see the market going. And I think that's what we're doing right now. We try to find a good mix between what are people really asking for, and what do we think we have to build to be successful in the long term, both because like something like AI, but also, again, what, for example, enterprise organizations need.
You mentioned earlier toward the start of the conversation that you had this sort of make or break moment in the early days of AI where you realized that AI was either going to be the future of n8n, or I think the word you used was the demise of n8n. Can you take us back to that moment? Like, what did you see that made you realize how important an inflection point in the trajectory of the company this is going to be? And then what did you do to figure out how to position n8n so well with respect to these AI tailwinds?
One thing I actually saw is I saw it was the funding announcement of Pinecone, where so I think they raised like $100 million round or something like that. I also saw that they kind of raised around a year before, at like some point before, and I was wondering like what changed. It's like why a company suddenly cares so much about them, and then I realized again it was exactly that. It's like what they were in the past is they were the vector database. What they became deep database for AI. That's where I realized, hey, we have to do something very similar with n8n as well. That's exactly what we did. What we also did honestly in the past, and what the most of our competitors did, is they kind of created an OpenAI node. A node they kind of connected via HTTP, did requests to OpenAI. And you could do quite some nice things with it. And you can still do it up to this point in time. What we however realize is that this is honestly not enough. Like you can do quite nice use cases, but the really powerful things are not possible. You really have to be able to kind of create proper agents, like change order prompts, add tools, add a vector database, and output parsers and all of the things. And that is when we then kind of built out our advanced AI functionality, where we allowed people to do the things in n8n in this kind of low code, no code way that was previously only possible by writing Python scripts. So we kind of drastically reduced the entry barrier for people to build things, and also reduce the speed, because the stuff has historically also been quite finicky, honestly. Like you connected A with B and it didn't work, and it's taking away all of those pain points, and it takes care about it underneath the hood. And you just click a few times, add an agent, add a model, add the memory, and so on, and it's working magically.
Yeah, and talking about companies that share, I guess, an open source ethos across AI. Obviously, the role of open source, I think, is changing across the industry at large. We've seen obviously a lot of headlines coming out of Meta, out of Mistral. OpenAI released their GPT, open source version, etc. What are just some perspectives you can share on how you perceive the state of open source in AI more generally, and maybe how do you see its role changing in the future?
I think the great thing was we always had about with open source is it's like it's driving very rapid innovation in the end, like because you have like this kind of huge army of people that really, really care very deeply. They're very smart and very often have a lot of time, and they kind of do things that organizations can very often not do, because again they have very different incentives or have very different timelines or have it simply doesn't work. Like, then I think the nice thing about open source is like you can do whatever you want, and you can explore things that maybe wouldn't even make sense in a company setting. So I actually think like open source is like really this amazing thing that kind of opens up the world to very many different possibilities. In the end, like some of them wins, and that a lot of open source projects never make it to anything. Obviously, this is the ones nobody talks about, but some of them, they kind of hit something, and that those are the kind of the ones that really kind of matter and kind of really shape kind of very often the whole industry in the end.
Maybe a follow-up question to that, Jan. I mean, do you see a shift in the role of open source? I mean, do you see that companies, today might be using some of these open source technologies to save money, to save costs, but maybe actually having more control inside of organizations over the performance of models might be a value proposition that evolves in the future?
Definitely, very, very much. I think like first, I'm not sure like first if open source is that as very often it's the cheapest thing. I think this is kind of misconception. It's actually very often not true. I think you win a lot of things like being able to kind of self-host, knowing where data is stored and what's happening with it. I think there's a lot of value there. But very often it's actually not the cheapest thing. Very often it's actually the more expensive thing, because you have hardware that's probably idle for 99% of the time, and this actually kind of turns out to be more expensive. So actually I'm not sure if that's actually true. But the second part I think is true. I think people care about it more and more. Like we actually work now with a few organizations, and that's actually the main reason why they wanted to use open source. It's not because it's free, it's because they care about the data privacy and data security angle. And I think that's also what we are always historically also seeing with n8n very often. It's like people want to kind of self-host and want to know where the data is stored. And with self-hosting, obviously don't mean they run it on the computer underneath the desk. They still run it on the cloud, but obviously in their own private cloud.
Yeah, and one, I think, noticeable shift over the last couple of years, something that, of course, n8n, I'm sure, has been a beneficiary of, is just improvements in the communication protocols between different systems and different models. And obviously, MCP is a high-profile candidate that has really driven the industry forwards. Can you talk a little bit about that, kind of how you see the changing role of some of these protocols in the future, and where you think they might evolve?
I think that if you kind of standardize, you kind of in the end, you kind of accelerate things. I think that's very important. Even interestingly, if the standard is maybe not perfect, I think it still adds so much value. And I think if MCP is going to be the one we're going to use in a few years, I have no idea. But I think it's great to have like a starting point and you kind of can build on top. In the end, this MCP is like kind of the HTTP of the AI workflows. I think that's really amazing. I think it will enable. It already enables now things like agent to agent, and it's a kind of building blocks you actually need for this kind of more powerful use cases, like for example, you had marketplaces or like plug-and-play automations. And I think n8n can act as the kind of the orchestration layer between this kind of diverse MCP agents and tools, and also obviously n8n is also the best kind of platform to build also tools that you can access with MCP as well.
Actually, on that, Jan, we haven't really done the straightforward what is n8n. So for somebody listening who has a passing knowledge of n8n but wasn't sure exactly what it is, what is n8n and when should people think about it when building an AI?
I think n8n is by now probably the easiest to use, most powerful way to build AI agents right now. I think it allows you kind of, again, build things you previously never even thought you could build. I think like the nice thing about it, you can go very fast from a first idea you have to a first prototype, and then bring that prototype into production.
What is the stack that you see people using with n8n?
Actually quite diverse. The nice thing about that system like n8n is you can actually connect everything to anything. There is probably not kind of this default stack people are using. Like they use literally any LLM, they use any kind of memory or vector store or any kind of application. Exactly, that's the thing that makes n8n great, because like honestly, like I don't know what LLM is going to win the race in the end. Who's going to be the best one? If it's going to be one, if it's going to be a million different ones, if it's going to be a small one, a big one, I have no idea. But that's the great thing about n8n is like we don't have to care, because the nice thing is you can use whatever is best for your use case. And I think that is what makes it so powerful.
Any interesting observations on what's been trending, positive or negative, in the n8n universe?
What people definitely use quite a lot is honestly still like all the kind of Google tools. Google is definitely still, I think, the kind of application you can use. Everybody, like people use it privately in large organizations. I think that's the amazing thing. That's why we definitely see that's probably one of the strongest ones. We definitely also see a lot of this kind of communication platforms, if it's a Slack or Telegram or anything like that. And it also kind of makes sense, especially in this kind of AI world, because you obviously need like an interface how you kind of interact with the agency build. And I think that is probably a few to call out. And apart from that, obviously also things like just databases, any kind of, again, the nice thing about n8n, you can connect literally anything. So it's not just kind of applications, also kind of low level things as well. And also, honestly, very often also internal tools as well.
One of the nice things about n8n is you struck a good balance between the sort of flexibility, customization, control that a developer might want with the ease of use that somebody who's less technical might want. Has your user base changed? Kind of the complexion of the n8n user base, has it changed as you've gotten more and more AI adoption?
It's quite interesting. Like when actually our user base started to explode, like since the last 8 months, you are really wondering if those people are really going to be the most successful. Like if the quality actually dropped, and quality doesn't mean obviously it's bad people. It's just like the kind of people that are successful with n8n, and they didn't, which was quite surprising. Like really people that are quite either already quite technical, or people that really like have a use case and they care very deeply about what they're building, and they're just willing to put in their work. It's like maybe they're not as technical when they kind of enter, but they have a problem they really want to solve. And we have actually quite a few users that actually started to learn to code because of n8n. And why do they do that? Because they can realize, hey, I can do that much. Like if I'm technical, but I cannot code, but again, it can literally go anywhere if I can code. It kind of this whole new world opens up. That is actually, it didn't change that much, and I think that's really amazing. There's so many technical people out there, and people are really interested. I think our community is really amazing. It's just the ideas they're having, how driven they are, and how much they also want to help each other out. I think that's just great.
Jan, do you think with the proliferation of adoption of many of these different AI technologies, the pressures are different on being a founder in 2025? I mean, you've lived it over the last 8 months.
Yeah, I think that it definitely changed things. I think the main thing is like the past, it was easier to plan and know where you're going. And right now you're always living this constant, I wouldn't call it fear, but kind of constant state of uncertainty where the world is moving. And you have to be really willing to kind of like, you have to find that you have to strike a very good balance between not missing anything important, but at the same time not jump on anything that's coming up your way. And I think that is definitely much harder, it feels like, than it was in the past.
Given that, how do you think the signals that you get as a CEO have changed in terms of how you weight them? I mean, even things like the usage you see across the business or the revenue being generated, in different parts of the company. How do you sort of assess the sort of durability of that and make sure you're investing behind the right things?
And that actually probably talks about something I think is generally quite important. It's definitely harder in kind of this open source world we are having, as we have obviously we have some use cases that generate revenues, like with enterprises, and we have a lot of people that use the product for free, and we never generate revenues with them. But honestly, none of them is more important than the other one, because one is obviously it's going to help us directly, but the other one is the thing that drives all of it. So it means you have to strike a very good balance between both of them. And honestly, normally I'm leaning much more heavily into kind of, for example, because you obviously asked about signals, but I think it's an important point. Is I normally lean much more heavily in kind of giving away more for free, because again, everything we give away for free kind of makes the whole product better for literally everybody and drives more adoption and also drives more revenues in the long term, versus everything we build for the enterprise organizations obviously just kind of helps a subset of the users. I think it's still important to do both, and I think you have to listen to both very closely. But also I think it's around timing in the end. It's right now, I think it's really about capturing the markets, and we have to listen, what do people really want to build? And I think what is important is to really capture the market generally and literally capture the smallest builder out there, because what we already see is that through the smallest builders, we get into the largest organizations out there. What I think is impossible is if you now focus very heavily on enterprise only, and I think we can never go then downwards again. I think nobody went from enterprise to kind of owning a space. And I think that is, again, also Google started the same way as well. They maybe own quite a lot. The same with Microsoft as well. But you have to start in the right direction there.
Right now we're seeing this explosion of people building with AI capabilities. Over the last few years, we've seen an explosion in the AI capabilities themselves. And so the question is that technological foundation, the AI capabilities themselves, do you think that is still innovating at the same rate it has over the last few years? Or are we finally asymptoting in terms of the capabilities coming out of foundation models or out of the open source world? Do you have a point of view on that?
I think probably looking at GPT-5, I think it definitely feels like it's slowing down, which kind of makes sense. I think it's not very often what happens is there's some more low-hanging fruits in the beginning than the later point in time, and you can throw more compute power and more data for quite a while, but at some point you're kind of maxed out there, and at some point it just becomes too much. So I think it definitely kind of feels kind of slowing down. However, I just think that's more or less a kind of a temporary thing, because I think there's so much money in the market right now where people exploring a lot of different things. And some of them are still very early, and I think they're not at the right stage yet. But I think as some of them were coming to the right stage, I think we're going to see probably another acceleration.
I mean, I'm maybe building on that, to Pat's question. I mean, we're seeing more code being written by machines, right, and more end-to-end agent-to-agent automation. How does that change the positioning of n8n? How do you think about areas you'll invest, maybe given that future?
I think one thing is, it probably talks a little bit to the kind of role as a developer. Like in the past, the developer was somebody that kind of built something for you. It's like they said, hey, I need X, and they built X for you. Now with tools like n8n and then all of the vibe coding tools, that's changing. You see developers more as the people that kind of create the guardrails for you, the people that empower you to build the things you actually want and need. And I think that is really amazing. And honestly, it also plays exactly what n8n was always about. It was always about empowering people. And I think it's great. I think literally every developer is kind of going into the role of empowering other people to build the things they actually want and need. Yes, developers obviously still have people, the vibe coders and other people like that. They're not going to build everything. They're still going to roll for the classical engineer. But I really love that kind of world where people are empowered, and the people that have the problems are the best equipped to kind of solve them themselves. And I think that's kind of a world where we're going. And I think that's that the engineers and developers are definitely a very important part for that.
I mean, Jan, something I think we'd love to know your opinion on. I'm sure a lot of people listening are struggling between building, verticalized applications that solve a very acute use case versus kind of having broader platform visions, right, for their companies. n8n is the horizontal of horizontal tools, right, in many ways. How do you see the positioning changing given some of those dynamics of some of these very vertical applications and then some of the more horizontal tools coming out of the labs and the like?
Yeah, I think like vertical tools are obviously amazing. If you have like one very specific use case that do this one thing perfectly and they can do it much better than every horizontal tool. And obviously that's exactly what happened with SaaS. Like in the SaaS world, like they have a vertical application for literally everything. That is again why we had the need for something like n8n, because you have to kind of bring it all of them together again. I think there's also a little bit, but also probably happens more and more in AI right now, where people build this kind of very vertical tools as well. But as this happening, there again the complexity increases again, and you either need kind of another orchestration tool, or like you need a horizontal tool that kind of built everything for you again. So either kind of again you bring all these tools together, or you use a more horizontal tool to kind of and build this thing in this one tool rather than kind of a million different ones. And again, I think that's again why we obviously feels like in a very good position there, because again, I think no matter which way it's going to turn out, I think we are very well positioned for the world.
If everything goes right, what will n8n be in 5 or 10 years? What role will n8n play in the world?
The idea is always like, for very many different reasons, I always compared n8n to Excel. I always thought about, hey, if people 15 years ago, they heard spreadsheets, they thought about Excel. And if people in a few years think about, hey, I have to build AI, I have to do anything with AI, the only thing that should come to mind is n8n. So I see it's more as kind of this kind of default orchestration layer, like what is kind of platform from everything to building to deploying and where you find your agents, anything like that. And I think that is where I think it's going to naturally evolve. And I think we are very, very well positioned, as we already kind of started to be like the default building tool already.
So Jan, you build a remote first company, obviously centered in Europe, but with global ambitions. Just talk a little bit about, thinking about going into the US and kind of building the team and scaling the organization over the last year.
Like obviously we started in Europe and the whole team was based here. Which we always was quite interesting. Like even though we were based in Europe, like our user base was always very global. Like for quite a long time, Europe and the US had the same size, even though we honestly didn't provide our US customers the best experience. It definitely shows there's like a very, very big need in the US. That's why we also right now expanding to the US. And we actually just right now opening our office in New York. And that's also why we're hiring quite a lot. It's like, especially in the US, but literally like also I guess we could say worldwide, literally everything from engineers to people in support and especially a lot of people in the go-to-market org. I think it's also kind of the thing that really gets me excited. Is like, I think not many European organizations kind of have the possibility to really build something really global and something that really matters. I think n8n is probably one of the orgs I think that has quite a lot of potential. It's nice to see that we are now finally kind of going that direction and kind of also kind of capture the US and taking that market over as well.
And maybe to wrap, we love to ask some kind of rapid fire questions just to get your take on a couple of key themes. I think one, just through your reflections of the last 6 years, what's maybe one of the hardest truths you've learned about Jan as a founder CEO?
One thing is probably, I really don't like to say no. There's so many different things out there. And I think very often it turned out to be okay, like to kind of do a lot of stuff in parallel. Sometimes in hindsight, it actually didn't turn out that well. Interestingly, I think that most things very luckily turned out to be quite well. So I'm very lucky there, but I think it also could have turned out very differently. And I think for the most companies, it actually turns out very differently.
We want you to keep taking those big swings.
Yeah.
What is one must read or must watch piece of content in AI? Blog, book, show?
Like I still love Her. That's just a movie. I think it's just, yeah, I think it's just this thing is that I think what I think especially amazing about it is like a few years ago, it was sci-fi and it's now suddenly this thing that is just around the corner. That's why I just love it. I think that's also a great movie.
Is there a tool or a product, Jan, you've been playing with in AI that you would recommend or that really interested you?
I think I just very recently and probably very late that came there, but I started to use Granola. I think it's just an amazing tool. It's so great. So simple to use. Does such an amazing job. So I think that would probably be the one that comes to mind right now.
What AI application or application category do you think is most likely to break out in the next 6 to 12 months?
I think it's kind of probably more this kind of AI-powered internal tooling. think there's obviously like this external part. I think it's a little bit hard. You have to be very careful there, but internally you can take much more risks. We also see that already at n8n quite a lot. That's obviously why I'm also excited about it.
Yeah, needless to say, we appreciate you, sharing some of your story, looking into your crystal ball for us, and kind of sharing some of the perspectives over the last 6 years. It's been a privilege for Sequoia to be a part of it. So thank you for having us on the journey. We look forward to the future.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.